Okay, sorry for the short delay. We've got a lot to fit in today, but before we get started, I just wanted to I'll try to tailor the program today to the audience. So give me a feel. How many people in the audience? It's your first time in China, first time buying, let alone buying first time here. Okay. Do we have any in the audience that have maybe been purchasing for a couple of years, have their ups and downs dealing with suppliers? All right, very good. Well, the target audience today is more for buying at the factory direct level, but the lessons that we're going to talk about apply whether you're new or a seasoned veteran. But before we start, I wanted to go over a few of the admin housekeeping issues really quick. Feel free to, if you take pictures or you want to record it, that's great. Share it with your friends. We'd love to have you take any notes, but don't feel like you have to write down every note. I'll provide the slides. If you leave your business card, I'll just send you the PDF. And I think we're also videotaping it, so we'll post it online a little bit later. We have I'm saving about 15 minutes or more for question and answer at the end. So if you do have questions, if you really want to ask, just raise your hand and I'll pause. But if you can, perhaps hold it till the end, and then we'll do question and answer. And also, please do ask some questions, because the show organizers, if they see that there's a lot of interaction, maybe they'll invite me back next year. So every question you ask helps me out as well. There's a survey, and we try to make the presentations better and better each year. So fill out the survey, give the speakers a critique, let us know what you would like us to cover next time. So we actually read each and every one of them. We take it very seriously. Okay, now let's dive into the actual program. I'll start off with an introduction to myself, but it won't be a sales presentation. I hate it when I go to a conference and the person stands up there telling about how great they are and why you should buy from their company. I'm the opposite. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, and I'm going to tell you all about them today. We'll cover, the core is negotiations, but we're going to spend some time on how to prepare yourself so that you're ready to be in a good negotiation position. And we're also going to talk about, after the negotiations are done, how do you follow through with some project management to make sure that what you negotiated turns into reality. And as I mentioned, plenty of time for Q&A. Okay, as a bit of a background, I'm from the U.S., grew up on the border with Canada near Buffalo. I moved to Asia in '93 as an exchange student, thought that I was coming for 6 months, 2 children, a wife, and a company with 200 employees later. I'm still here. So I've been living in China full-time since '93. 10 years ago, I founded Passage Maker Sourcing Solutions, which is a buyer's representative. So we help clients find and manage their suppliers in China. Our niche is called black box manufacturing, where say you're making a watch and you have this great idea for the electronics in the watch, but maybe you don't want to tell the watch manufacturer the details of everything, so the components are delivered to my team, where I have 130 employees that kit things together. So since our team is in China, touching the product, controlling the supply chain, we're also involved in quality control, supply chain management, writing the POs, negotiating with the sub-suppliers. So in that capacity, I've learned a lot over the last 15 years, and I'm going to share with you some of the internal techniques that we use to manage our supply chains, both in the strategic sourcing, meaning finding the right partner, as well as the tactical supply chain management on a day-to-day basis. I'm also part of the China Sourcing Information Center, which is basically an association of foreign buyers like ourselves. The speakers yesterday were volunteers at the China Sourcing Information Center. We record many of these videos. We offer tutorials. We have an Ask the Expert service. Always preparing white papers. There's a best of mailing. Also, by the way, how many people here are from a Spanish-speaking country? Do we have any? Okay, great. We have a few in the back. We actually have a team of 3 Spanish volunteers that are taking all of our information and converting it into Spanish. So we'll have hundreds of blog posts and conferences just like this in Spanish language as well. Okay, let's talk about managing your expectations. It's not realistic that everybody here in the audience has enough buying power to go factory direct. So today we're going to talk about managing your expectations into who should you be negotiating with. I'll get into that a lot more later. I like to say that there is no set formula. In some countries, you go to the market They say 100, you say 50, and you end up splitting it at 75. There's no formula in China. I've dealt with factories where they say 50, and that's a fixed price. I've gone into factories for the same product, they say 1,000, hoping that you're going to say 500 for the same thing. So there's no formula. Some factories, it is what it is, take it or leave it. Others, huge area for negotiation. How do you deal with that? The answer is to do your research, to make sure you're comparing apples to apples, and we'll go over those techniques today. I also want to talk about truth elasticity. There are great suppliers out there, but sometimes because of miscommunication, we might have the impression that, oh, that supplier tricked me or they weren't honest. When I say truth elasticity, I mean when we ask a question like, are you the factory? They might say yes. Now, we thought that they meant they own the factory, where they're saying they have a relationship with the factory, or their cousin owns the factory. So are they lying? Not really, but because we didn't ask the question in a way that makes it clear, we might feel slighted later when we find out that they are just an outside sales representative of the factory rather than the actual owner. So there's a little bit of truth elasticity, meaning the answer that you get may not always be 100% truthful. There's also miscommunication on the buy side where we're not asking the right questions. I'll give an example. Do you outsource anything? If a factory says they don't outsource anything, that's impossible. So for this plastic pen, does that mean that they actually converted the petroleum into plastic pellets and those plastic pellets into injected plastics and they make the ink inside? No way. At some level, everything is outsourced. So as a professional buyer, we should be asking the supplier what key production segments are done in-house. What is outsourced? That's a better question than do you outsource and a yes or no answer coming back. Another common mistake is to ask, can you make this? As I was joking outside with some of the audience members, yes, when you ask, can you make it? China put a man in space, they built the Great Wall. Yeah, they can make just about anything. It's a different question to say, have you made this blue pen using Japanese ink to American standards? That's a lot different than saying, can you make this pen for me? Because your electronic microphone manufacturer would probably say, yes, we can make a pen. Have they ever made it? No. But if you're going to buy 2 million, they'll find a way to make a pen. So always ask, have you made it, not can you make it. Now, before we get into negotiation, let's talk about a little bit of homework. These are the basic things that you need to know before you sit down with a seller and start negotiating. One is, who are you dealing with? As I mentioned, today's program is oriented towards medium to larger buyers who have the ability to go factory direct. But if you're not sure, for example, if you're using the strategies that you would negotiate with a factory with a wholesaler, you're going to have a lot of problems. So let me explain the difference between factory, broker, and wholesaler. Factories are actually that's the place of production. That's the manufacturer. The broker and trading companies, they might represent manufacturers. They might be some kind of import-export agent, and they're not always bad. As a small buyer, you might not have the ability to go factory direct, so you might be forced to deal with a broker or a trading company. They might be able to get a better price and control the quality, and they do the headaches of managing the factory. So, and the questions and the way you would structure your contract with a trading company are radically different than a factory, different from a wholesaler. For example, many small buyers don't even have the ability to go deal with a large trader, let alone a factory, so you end up buying items on the spot market. You go over to Shenzhen in the electronics market, and you buy 10,000 wireless microphones. Now, at the wholesale level, when you leave the wholesale market, you might think, oh, I found a great seller at the wholesale level, whether it's online on the internet or a physical wholesaler, and you think, I'll come back in 2 weeks and buy some more. Because that wholesaler hasn't told you where the manufacturer is. They might be swapping out suppliers, swapping out components between each order, so there's radical variance in terms of the quality that can come to you order by order. So when you're dealing with a wholesaler, you really need to focus on intense quality control, price negotiation, and I'm going to buy it and I'm going to pick it up right now. I've seen so many cases at the wholesale market, place an order for something, work out the specifications, and then say, okay, ship it 2 months from now. In between, the wholesaler has changed their sub-supplier. Now you're getting Korean batteries instead of Japanese batteries, and raw materials different. So if you're buying at the wholesale, you have to be really careful. If you're at that level, I've done some blogs, and I did a different video presentation about small orders placed at the wholesale level. So I've got plenty of content for you. Leave your business card. But today is more about dealing with factories. Okay, I was asked to put together in one slide tips for how do you find the right supplier. Now, finding a supplier is easy. Open up the internet, go to global sources. There's probably 500 suppliers of pens. But how do we make sure that that's the right supplier for us? That's hard. So I was asked to put it into one slide. It's hard to put 12 years of experience and consolidate it, but I did. I took my 12 years and I put it into a 300-page book, and then I took that 300-page book and I made 10 videos, which are each are 2 minutes long, at the Global Sources website, also at the China Sourcing Information Center website, chinasourcinginfo.org. So you can watch those videos about finding and managing suppliers. But if I have to take all of that and cram it into one power slide, grossly squishing it all together, here are my 6 steps. First, you have to ask yourself, what is the ideal supplier? What are the attributes you're looking for? Because if you're not sure what the exact supplier will look like, everybody's going to look like a good supplier. So list things like, what equipment do they need to have, their production experience, do they have access to certain raw materials, whatever is important for you. Your tablet needs to run for 8 hours, not 6 hours. It needs to be has to have an EC tag on it for sale in Europe, certain size. So you make clear, as long and detailed as possible, a list about what would the ideal supplier look like. Then you take that list and you go online. You go to Global Sources. Wow, I've just found 45 potential suppliers of tablets. Well, then you would compare it against your list. I wanted to find a tablet manufacturer in South China because my case manufacturer is in South China and I'd like to consolidate together. Okay, so let's throw out the 30 suppliers that are not in South China. So be very picky. If something doesn't look perfect, most likely it isn't. So don't try to say, hey, maybe this supplier is okay, I can work with them. You want to focus on finding the right one and then later verify if they are legit. So be very picky. Narrow it down to 5, maybe 5 to 15, not based on price. Because as soon as you ask the question, what does this cost, you will subconsciously gravitate towards the option that is the lowest cost. And usually in China, lowest cost means lowest quality. There's a lot of hidden costs. For example, a supplier might quote you EXW. One supplier is quoting EXW $5. Another is FOB $6. And you're thinking, well, $5 is less than $6, right? No, because EXW doesn't include the taxes, local shipping, getting it on the boat, customs clearance. You might buy that product at the factory for $5 and end up spending just $1,000 alone trying to get it onto the boat. So when you do your research, you need to make sure that you're comparing apples to apples, oranges to oranges. So don't let price be the driver in your research. So between step 3 and 4 is where negotiation can take place, and we'll get to that in a few slides. But after you've negotiated, you've narrowed it down, you start talking price, maybe you get it down to 2 or 3 potential factories, then you go do your audits and your due diligence. But the testing doesn't stop there. A lot of buyers say, yeah, I think I found the right supplier. I've got a week in China. I need to fly back to headquarters. Let's go place the order. I would suggest you place a test order first. And if that order goes well, then you place the full order. So do your auditing, sampling, test order, and then full order. So there's 12 years put into one slide. All right. A question that is asked probably by everyone in this room at some point today is, this supplier looks good, but are they legitimate? And when I say legitimate, you're asking 2 things. One, are they a legitimate business? Will they be around after I give a deposit to complete my order? Are they scam artists that are going to take my money and run? So are they legitimate in terms of a company? Are they legitimate? When you ask, is the supplier legitimate, you're also thinking, do they have the ability to produce the product I want at the agreed quality at the agreed lead time? So are they legitimate in terms of quality? So here's how to answer that using auditing, testing, and inspection. And when I got into the business, I didn't know the difference between audit, testing, and inspection. I just thought it was all quality control. So let me give you a little primer on how they work. An audit is a review of the factory. Usually comes in two forms. You have the factory audit, which is, does this factory have the people, the skills, the equipment to make a certain product? If you do an audit on, if you're looking to buy pens, and you do an audit on a microphone company, the audit better come back that says they don't have the production equipment to make pens. Yeah, they're maybe a legitimate company, but they're not suitable for your pen order. Next is the social audit, especially if you're putting your brand on it and maybe you're selling your product to a famous retailer or into Disney. Then social audits about, are minimum wage paid? Do people work overtime? Is the place safe? That's another important audit. These things cost hundreds of dollars, not thousands of dollars. I'm not in this business, but I'd be happy to introduce the companies that have worked well for me. Next is testing. So testing is something that happens in a laboratory. You want to make sure that the battery in the wireless microphone doesn't leak. Well, generally you would take it, it goes to a laboratory, they hit it with a salt test, or they put it through a torture chamber, and they find out, does this battery leak or not? So that's something that needs to take place in a laboratory. Final is inspection. So inspection means looking at the product that's coming off the assembly line. Ideally, you're pulling something at random off the line and comparing it to your agreed sample. In short, you audit the factory, you do the testing in a lab, and the inspection is of the production. So those are the cores to determining, is the factory legit in terms of quality. In terms of, is it a legitimate business? The beauty of a centrally planned economy like China is that there's a lot of paperwork that companies need to fill out, and it's all in Chinese, but it's all available on the internet, or an accountant or due diligence firm can look it up. So in America, as a private company, it's very hard for my customers and competition to find out the details of, did I pay taxes on time? What was my revenue? How many employees do I have? Am I zoned in the correct area? In China, that's all in the public record. You just need to know where to ask and find out. So if you're about to do business with a factory, because they say that they have 800 employees and have been in business for 12 years, are owned by Mr. Lee, and have a certain reputation, you don't have to take people by their word. You can actually, for a few $100s, you can hire companies that go out and do the due diligence. They'll go to the local authorities, photocopy a bunch of documents translated in English, and confirm, does Mr. Lee really own this factory? How many years have they been incorporated? So if that's important to you, know that even as foreigners, we can access that information. For some of my really big buyers, we get involved in hiring investigators. I have a great reference, also a company run by another American, and he has 60 employees in China. They get hired, they go and knock on the factory door and say, we'd like a job. So these people are plants on the inside of the factory to make sure that your suppliers are abiding by your quality process. For example, if you're a big buyer, you're selling to Walmart, and you want to make sure that there's no child labor. You want to make sure that the factory is serious about respecting your intellectual property. So if you've got tens of thousands of dollars to spend on investigation, know that you can even have a plant unknown to your factory inside the factory. Chinese companies have been doing this with each other for a long time. Now, finally, we're getting in the game as well. Okay, so those were inexpensive tools. Everyone likes free tools, so let me give you a bunch of free ways to answer, is this potential supplier or is my current supplier legit? The first is, well, let's skip to the second one because it's so obvious. Ask for references. Why more customers and buyers don't ask their supplier, hey, give me a couple references. I'd like to talk to your happy customers. If they can't give you one customer that's a friend of the boss to say a few good words about them, run away. Now, sometimes they will say, all right, I see that you're in Canada and we have exclusivity with this American company and we can't disclose any of our details about the North American market. Fine. Can I talk to a customer of yours in Holland, or do you have anybody in New Zealand that's not in competition? So usually, if you ask a couple times, the supplier will say, yeah, talk to Jim down in Auckland and he'll tell you what it's like working with us. If they can't give you at least one person, that's really a red flag in my book. Okay. Also very important is, do they have a quality manual? Yogi, our friend here, just spent 40 days training a Chinese factory how to make his product. When he left, he was a little bit saddened to see that all the training that he gave them wasn't put down into a written document, so the next time he places an order, he might have to do the training all over again if he deals with that company. So a good supplier will have a written quality manual which defines how is this widget made. In China, there's a lot of turnover with laborers. So if you have a good system, like if you come to visit my assembly center, you will see that we almost assume that every employee is on the job for the first day. Even if he's been with me for 12 years, part of his process for the day is to sit down, read the basic instructions about how to put the widget together, sign off that he read it, then get to work. So if the supplier doesn't have a written manual that defines how to put things together, then it's not scientifically repeatable, and there's a likelihood that, hey, after Chinese New Year, 10% of their workforce doesn't come back, your order is going to be put together by a bunch of new people that haven't been trained. Kind of scary. So make sure that your supplier, if you're dealing with a factory direct level, has a written quality manual. If you want to see a sample, it's under the, I think, the About Us section on my website, PSS China, and I'll show you our project quality manual. You can even print it out and use it as a template for comparing with your factories. It's all based on ISO. It's open to the public. Okay, before we get to negotiation, I've stressed you need to know who you're dealing with. Are they legitimate? But also, as a professional buyer, there's some basics that we need to understand. Before you can ask price, you need to know what an Incoterm is. You need to know when does the transfer of ownership take place. As I mentioned before about EXW versus FOB, CIF, DDP, there's just so many acronyms out there to define when does the ownership transfer. An Incoterm definitely defines when does the ownership transfer from the seller to the buyer. To make things easy, I like to have all of my suppliers during the RFQ just quote me FOB nearest port in China. That way it's fair to the northern company as well as to the southern Chinese company. If you say quote everything FOB Hong Kong, then it's unfair to the factories up north. So just say, hey, give me a quote FOB for RFQ, request for quotation, a quote that's FOB nearest port, and then when you get down to 2 or 3 suppliers, maybe you want to change the Incoterms. So here's a graph which defines all the different Incoterms. I think there are a few more now, but this is a year or two old. So you can see sometimes at EXW, you take ownership at the factory door. DDP, delivered duty paid, means the supplier is responsible for getting it all the way to your door. A lot of new buyers and some professional buyers make the mistake of assuming that transfer of ownership is when payment transfer is done. So you might sit down and spend some time talking to a supplier, and everybody agrees on FOB. You're like, all right, let's do business, great. Meaning you think that you're going to pay the supplier when it's on the boat, when it's ready to leave China, when you take ownership. The supplier's thinking they want 100% up front to start the order. So radically different. You need to ask your suppliers, okay, what are the payment terms? What are the Incoterms? And if they don't understand the Incoterms, just say, is it FOB, EXW? And they'll know what you're talking about. So payment terms and transfer of ownership are different. Stay away from EXW, especially if you're a novice buyer, because that means you take title to it at the door of the factory. You're responsible for organizing 2 guys in a Chinese truck to get it to the port. You're responsible for paying duties, for organizing the import-export license. So I make a living out of organizing the exportation out of China for my customers. But if you're new, it's a lot of work. So don't be seduced by the siren song of a low EXW price, because there's a lot of hidden costs behind it. Stick with FOB. Don't think, all right, I'm going to make it easy and have all my suppliers quote DDP, deliver it to my door, because many suppliers are great at making something, but they're horrible at organizing logistics. They use their cousin's shipping partner, and they don't really even get second quotes for shipping, so as a result, their overall price is higher. My suggestion, let the factories focus on making a product, and then bring in a third party to do the logistics. All third-party logistics, freight forwarder, customs broker, they go by so many names, but have professionals do logistics, professional manufacturers do manufacturing. Okay, now let's talk about negotiation. After all of that, you find yourself at a factory, you go across the border, you sit in a car for 3 hours through traffic and dusty roads, you're sitting at a factory, they got the right price, they're verified, they've got good quality. You find yourself at a table. Often the negotiations will be over lunch. So for this setting, let's assume that maybe you're at a dinner table next door to the factory. Chinese suppliers are great hosts. You would be amazed. You think that you're a small buyer and they're bringing out seafood and delicacies from all over the world. Great hosts. But sometimes it can be overwhelming. Let alone, how do I use chopsticks? How should I communicate? So here are some tips. The first tip when you're face-to-face negotiation is orient yourself towards the decision maker. What so often happens, especially to Americans, is we gravitate towards the person that speaks English. And who usually speaks English at the factory? The junior salesperson that was an exchange student overseas or watched a lot of Hollywood movies and has the best English. So you think you're building a relationship with the factory. You go to karaoke with this person. They give you a tour of all the sites around town. You're like, yeah, I'm really close to this factory. Then you realize that person that speaks English has only worked there for 6 months and changes their job every 2 years. So you've just spent a lot of time building a relationship with someone that doesn't matter. So my suggestion is find out when you're at the negotiation table, who's the boss, who makes the decision. And one easy way to tell is to a restaurant with a factory in China. The guest of honor usually sits next to the general manager, and you'll be in the back facing the door. So whoever sees who's coming in from the door, the first person you see when you come in the door is usually the head honcho. But you can also just ask for business cards, who reports to who. And even if that person doesn't speak English, you'll find that the communications are gravitating towards that person. Okay, I kind of joke, but a lot of times hard liquor can come out at a negotiation situation, whether it's over lunch, certainly at dinner. I've been in northern China in Dongbei where baijiu came out at breakfast. So baijiu is a really strong local liquor, kind of like a vodka of sorts. And on one hand, you'll be in a situation where, okay, I want to participate, I want to have cheers, I want to show them that I'm fun. We're building that guanxi, that personal relationship. So you might be tempted, yeah, let me have a drink. This is what has happened to me early on, and I see it every time that a foreigner, especially if they're by themselves, go to the China meeting. You're surrounded at a round table. Everybody is friendly, wonderful food, these little bottles and what appears to be little shots around the table. I guarantee this will happen. The top manager will be on your right, and probably the English translator or a salesperson, a low-level associate will be on your left. Before you've even had a chance to eat, the person to your left will say, okay, Ganbei, you've traveled all the way around the world. I'd like to have a drink with you. Oh, look at these glasses. They're so small. How can I say no? So cheers. And in China, cheers is done one-on-one, not the group European-style drink. So you'll think, oh, that was kind of rough, but it was just small. Then you realize, okay, there's 12 people at the table. The next person says, can I have a drink with you? Thank you for coming all the way around the world. And then they say, well, you just had a drink with my subordinate. I'm losing face if you don't have a drink with me. So, okay, one for you. Next thing you know, you're signing a contract on product that you haven't seen yet. Hopefully it doesn't get that bad. But what I mean is manage your expectations. Know that they're not trying to trick you. They're not trying to get you drunk. But that is just part of culture in China. Sometimes, to have a few drinks. Often when the factory side, an engineer that doesn't use English at work, but he studied a little bit in college, has a few drinks in him. Now he's telling you about the factory in English. So alcohol can really, it can be a linguistic lubrication. Here's what I like to do. I like to, if I don't feel like drinking, I need a good reason. So I will say for religious reasons or for health reasons, or my wife doesn't like me coming home. If I want to keep my wife, I better not smell like baijiu. And just, they will respect that. It's not like a fraternity where they're trying to force alcohol onto you. You can just say, I'm not drinking today, but thank you very much. I look forward to enjoying the meal with you. They're not going to force the issue, and it won't break the relationship. However, I like to participate, but not participate too much. So if I know it's going to be like a big signing ceremony, we're negotiating $1 million, they're going to want to definitely have a drink and make a big deal about it, I'll bring foreign alcohol that I know they won't like, just like I don't like baijiu. So I show up with a bottle of Jose Cuervo or Jim Beam, really nasty American. I like it, but they don't. And oh, here's my gift to you. Cheers. Oh, let me pour you a drink of tequila. Cheers. Whoa. Okay, so suddenly the endless shots stop and you focus on business. Yet you participated by giving something to them. So giving a gift, whether it's alcohol, chocolates, a cap from your local ball team. Those things, they really go far in showing that, hey, you came all this way, you brought a gift, you want to build that relationship. So those are my suggestions for Buy Joe Backdoor. We could probably talk about alcohol in China for the rest of the hour, but I'll just leave it there. Okay, so here are some tips about using a translator. Especially Americans, we're so excited. We travel halfway around the world. We sit down with that supplier out in Zhejiang on the 12-hour flight, it's 15-hour flight from 18 hours from New York. We've been preparing the presentation, our pitch that we're going to give. We get a chance to sit down with the general manager. Translator's right there. Bam! The American speaks for 20 minutes. Translate that. The translator wasn't taking notes. Says, yeah, they're happy to be here in Chinese. That's not what you want to convey. So my suggestion would be slow down. If you're using a translator, prepare them for what is your message. You don't want them to negotiate for you. You don't want them to become the representative of the foreign side, but you want them to know your game plan. You want them to at least know your keywords, especially if you're dealing something technical. HDMI. Do they really know how to say HDMI or these technical specs in their language? So ask questions. Instead of saying, do you understand HDMI, say, how is HDMI applied? At which function is this used? Or ask questions so you know that your translator has the skill set. Slow down, of course. What I like to do is recommend to my customers, all right, keep it straightforward. Don't use a lot of, sayings like, give me a ballpark price. In English, that means, give me a general price. But, translating, give me a price that's based on a baseball pitch. It's not going to come across. So avoid kind of slang and those things. And one sentence, translate it. Okay, Mr. Wang, the general manager, doesn't speak English, but I want to build a relationship with him. So I will look Mr. Wang in the face and say, translator, please convey the following. Mr. Wang, it's a pleasure to be at your factory. I understand you're ISO compliant. It's great to be here. I'd like to know, how many years have you been in business? And so you don't talk to the translator and then say, okay, tell that to Mr. Wang. You try to build a relationship even if someone else is conveying the voice. I also suggest you bring your own translator. Most of the hotels can arrange a translator. There are certainly companies, you can find freelancers. I'll give you an example. We're giving a factory tour, and we're looking around asking questions, and we would do things like, okay, who's in charge of engineering? So you ask the question, everyone's talking to themselves, and the translator of the company says, Mr. Lee is our most experienced engineer. However, if the translator worked for you, they might have heard that Mr. Lee has only been working there for a couple weeks, but he does have some experience, seems like a good guy that would make a good impression. That's what they might be saying. And when the translator works for the factory, they're going to tell you what they think you need to hear rather than what you should be hearing. So I always encourage the buy side to bring their translator, even if the sell side has a translator of their own. They are your ears at the factory. Probably the most important thing is just to relax. You're the buyer. The money's in your pocket. A lot of customers, the foreign buyers, come to China. They're really worried. Well, what if I drop the food with the chopsticks? Or should I hold the business card with 2 fingers when I hand it out? Relax. Don't worry about that stuff. You're the buyer. The money's in your pocket. Usually, it's the supplier that's nervous. Wow, does this customer eat pork? What if they don't like seafood? They're also nervous. So just relax. You'll find that suppliers are great hosts, very friendly. Sometimes my presentations come off a bit negative, but I'm not here to say that Chinese suppliers are bad. To the contrary, there are a lot of great suppliers out there. Some of them are like friends and family to me. My children are half Chinese, so I certainly don't have anything against China. It's just, as buyers, we need to be smart, because if we're not asking the right questions or looking at things through the right lenses, it's very easy to fall into miscommunications and common pitfalls. All right, let me give you a trick. If you do have somebody on your team with a big nose and round eye like this one, and they speak Chinese, you don't necessarily want to tell everybody that at the meetings. So I have a little program where I bring my translator, and when we get to the point where we're negotiating price, I give her a signal to leave, and I sit there playing with my phone, pretending that I'm checking messages, and I'm just listening really hard. So often I've heard things like, oh, the Americans have deep pockets. Let's add 10% more than we normally do. One time I heard, yeah, he's kind of got old sneakers on. I don't think he's a serious buyer. If we're going to get him, we need a low price. So I don't let them know that I speak Chinese. And then later at the banquet, I thank everybody in Chinese, like, oh no, he was listening the whole time. Don't let that happen in reverse. Here's a real program. We were negotiating millions of dollars of auto parts. Our customer was American, but they had subsidiaries in Germany and Japan. So there's a big meeting going to take place in Zhejiang. Everyone flies into the Pudong airport. I wasn't with them. Mr. Smith from the U.S., Mueller from Germany, I forget who was from Japan, but they all get in the car. They arrive at roughly the same time at the Pudong airport, and there is a representative from the factory with a sign that says the names and waiting for you. Let's go in the car. So the drivers, no speak English, factory this way, carry the luggage. So these three managers haven't been face to face for a couple months. They've got a big negotiation, so they sit in the back of the comfortable van with air conditioning, talking about their strategy. How are they going to negotiate? So they get to the factory, and it's like the factory knew what they were going to say. Eventually, they negotiated a deal, and then they realized that the driver was the owner's son who went to school at Oxford, and he picked him up just to listen for the car ride. So I've gone into situations where, for the small orders, not so much, but I've found hidden mirrors in rooms, found a microphone live under a table one time. So you kind of almost have to assume that the microphone's on if you've got big orders. And also, just because someone doesn't speak English does not mean that they don't understand exactly what you're saying. If I had $1 for every time that someone said, look, where's he from, or how tall is he, or why is there another Lawai in our apartment building? For every time someone has said that in front of me, next to me in an elevator, I'd probably have $1 million by now after 15 years. So people, don't let it happen to you where people you're saying things that might go into the wrong ear. Okay, you might say, Mike, you've already talked for 45 minutes, but you haven't talked about price. How do we negotiate price? Everyone wants to get the best deal. It's really simple. Don't rely on your negotiation skills, rely on your research skills. My negotiations with suppliers go like this almost every time. Mr. Lee, it's been a pleasure getting to know you. I've enjoyed a glass of Baijiu. I hope you've enjoyed the Jose Cuervo. And now that we've gotten to know each other, you have a great factory. I really want to do business with you. You're ISO compliant. However, per our company's protocols, my team at headquarters has been doing some research, and we understand that Mr. Su's factory 2 miles away has his price is 7.5% lower than yours. I'm not sure if his quality is as good as yours, but it looks good enough. Can we split the difference and do business? My negotiation is almost like that, but if you go in there playing poker and you haven't done the research to find out what is a realistic price, you're going to get eaten alive. So if you go in there, I talked to Mr. Lee, he's 20% less than you. And then Mr. Wang, he knows that he's the rock bottom leader in the industry, you're never going to win that negotiation. But if you go in there saying, with the truth, yeah, I've done the research, I understand that material specs and delivery dates and payment terms, my research just show that I should be buying this for 2.6 cents. Be very specific. The supplier is going to respect that you did your homework, and negotiation is going to be easy. So do your proper research. Don't just go in there and play poker trying to get the best price. Chinese people have been negotiating with each other for 2,000 years. It's not like 5,000 years of continuous history. It's not like I'm going to walk in with superior negotiation ninjutsu and get a better price. So luckily, thanks to the internet, global sources, trade shows, you can get reference pricing so that you don't have to rely on your ability to box a better price. Okay, now we're talking about getting pricing. Let's talk about how do you make that payment and how do you avoid financial risk. Financial risk meaning the money's going to disappear. Okay, I often get asked, Mike, we found a great supplier. They want 100% upfront. Is that right? Or sometimes they say, I need to, for cash flow reasons, I can't pay unless it's 30 days after delivery. So the first thing I said in the presentation was managing expectations, everything's negotiable. The price is contingent upon the payment terms. It's based on the quality, it's based on lead time. So all of these things, you might say, I need it tomorrow. Okay, it can be done. the holy trinity is price, quality, and lead time. You can have any two, but you can't have all three at the same time. So you might have to give a little bit on price in order to get something on lead time. So often, if payment terms are important to you, when you narrow it down to the top suppliers, be clear to them. It's really important that I get set up a payment plan, and I'm willing to pay a little bit more in order to help my cash flow situation. So everything is negotiation. And of course, the supplier is always going to say, well, our terms are 100% upfront. Some buyers say, oh, those are your terms? Well, I guess it's not negotiable. Okay. Yeah, everything is negotiable in China. So that's just the opening gambit. I like to go with 30, 40, 30. As Charles mentioned in his presentation, he also uses 30, 40, 30. 30% deposit, 40% when production is done at ship date, and 30% after it has been delivered to you back home, so that you have a chance to check the quality. The reason the deposit is important, sometimes, and this happened to me early on in my career, great contract, well-written, bilingual contract, we agree on a delivery date. The day before delivery, I get a call from Mr. Lee. Mike, we're great friends. I hope you enjoyed the baijiu. And turns out that we're not going to be able to ship tomorrow. What? Why not? Well, I know we signed that contract, but the price of steel went up 15%, and I'm waiting for it to go back down before. We're partners on this, right? Let's wait for the price to come back down before we start production. But I've already sold it to my customers. So what I like to do is use that 30% to lock in the price. Mr. Lee, I'm going to give you 30% up front to show that I'm a serious partner for you. But when I give you this 30%, I need you to show me that you use my money to buy the raw materials for my order. Snap a picture. Let my representative come take a look. I don't want to hear that you ran out of Japanese ink and now you can't make my pens. So if I'm going to give you 30% up front, you buy the ink that's going to be used in my order, put it in your warehouse, and it's only for me. So put that into the contracts. Let that money, that deposit, work for you rather than finance somebody else's order. The 40% has no protection for you unless you tie it with some kind of inspection. A lot of buyers think they're smart and say, okay, we'll pay the 40% after it ships, after it clears customs. That means production is done and it's on the boat. I've seen a box of rocks clear customs and put on the boat so that the supplier could get the 40% deposit for the 40% payment for cash flow reasons. They knew that the customer would eventually discover rocks, but now that's going to give them a month before the rocks arrive in New York to get their cash flow in order, and then they'll give a discount on the next order to the customer who they sent rocks to. Honest, I've seen rocks ship because the customer said, all right, just show us the proof, the bill of lading that something is shipped. What you want to do is have an inspector or your own team or an agent go to the factory dangling the cash for the 40% and say, all right, when your product, does this product meet spec? Yes. Is the container closed at the right count? Here's your money. That's a simplification, but that's basically what a quality gate is. So the 40% must be tied to some type of product inspection, a performance gate, before payment is made. The 30%, as explained yesterday, is good because if maybe there's a small percentage defect, 2% defect, it didn't get picked up, or maybe there's some damage in shipping, if you don't have some type of leverage with the supplier, whether it's the next order or the 30% that you've kept off the table until it's delivered, good luck trying to negotiate something. So that's real leverage. And when you think about it, some suppliers in certain industries, commodities, their margin might be just 5, 10%. Other suppliers, they're making 30, 40% margin. So when they get the 30 plus 40, 70% up front, at least they've covered their internal costs. So if you go out of business, or God forbid there's a typhoon and the boat sinks with the goods, at least they didn't lose a lot of money. So most suppliers will agree that 30, 40, 30 is fair to both sides. Okay, if I look back at all the cases I've been involved in where the customer lost money, most of the time it comes down to quality issues. The supplier wasn't specific about the batteries that they wanted in their cell phone, and the supplier thought some other material would be okay. It gets delivered, and then the buyer says, no, that's not what I ordered. The supplier says, well, you didn't tell me what you wanted. That probably is the number one way to lose money, is to not be extremely specific about what you want. So it wasn't that the factory tried to trick the buyer. It was that there was a miscommunication. So if you want to avoid money disappearing, get the quality clear and agreed by both sides. Then occasionally suppliers go out of business. I've seen suppliers, they knew that they were going out of business, so they went to the trade show and gave the lowest price in order to get some deposits in the door in hopes of saving their company and worry about quality and delivery later. So there are cases where the company is not going to be around to complete your order. So you do have to do some due diligence, as we talked about, checking out the factory, talking to customers, having a third party, a couple $100, doing an audit or some financial due diligence. If you come all the way to Hong Kong, take another drive across the border and go visit the factories. Are they legitimate vendors? Are they real companies? Is it just a warehouse with two guys sitting around hoping to get an order and build a factory? So, most suppliers are a pleasure to deal with, but there are enough bad suppliers out there that it makes buyers, we have to be careful about who we're dealing with. Not saying every supplier is out to cheat us, but there are some, and there are enough of them that statistically you can't just assume that the average supplier is going to work out. All right, we do have enough time, so I'm going to add the 7 lessons that I learned the hard way. Now it's already been 15 years. I haven't updated this. I took this slide off an old presentation, but the lessons are still valid. Okay. State your lead times and penalties in the contract. It's not enough just to have it in the contract, but more importantly, you want to have some confirmation that the supplier understands this. Mr. Lee, our contract says that you're going to ship by April 15th, and if you don't ship that date, the penalty is going to be a 3% discount every week that you're late. Something that's realistic, that both sides agree to in advance. You can't say, on my $100,000 order, if you miss the delivery date, you need to pay me $1 million. They're not going to respect that. They might sign it just to get the order, but then the court case will say that's unrealistic. So it needs to be a balanced penalty, but if you don't state the penalty in the contract, then it's impossible to enforce and it hasn't set the right tone for the agreement. So do state your lead times and penalties in the contract. I'll give you an example. During my entire 15 years in China, I've encountered a lot of late deliveries. Never once have I had a supplier say to me, Mike, we missed the delivery date. Let me pay the FedEx to express mail you a container load of replacement parts overnight. Never once in my 15 years, until I started putting it in a contract. What happens if the order is late? Okay, if the order is late less than 1 week, then the certain replacement parts will be shipped FedEx at a pre-agreed rate. And then, it's a matter of, Mr. Wong, we signed this contract in front of all your employees. I know you're not a liar. You don't want to lose face. Maybe you forgot about this term, but here it is. It's in the contract, and it's serious for us. Turns out Mr. Wong does the right thing and pays for the FedEx bill. But if you don't have it in the contract and you haven't pre-agreed, good luck trying to get someone to pay for it. All right. If you're doing something customized, you're making a wireless microphone, and you're taking a pre-existing wired microphone, and you're adjusting things, and you're putting your hand ergonomic designs to it, and it's your proprietary customization. Own that tooling, because if something goes wrong with the supplier, you want to stop them from producing your product for someone else, and you also want to take that tooling and deliver it to a new supplier. So I suggest, if you're doing something customized, put in the contract that you own the tooling. A lot of buyers get lazy and say, hey, just amortize it, build it into the price, and we'll spread the cost of the tooling over 100,000 units. What happens if you have a problem at unit 100 and you need to get the tooling out? The supplier is going to make you pay for the rest of the tooling before you can take it away. So I've gone into factories with police to take the tooling that we clearly owned for the customer and remove it from the factory. I've also gone into factories begging on my hands and knees, please let us take the tooling out because this customer never signed a contract with you, but let me pay you, $5,000 just to get it out the door. Sometimes I have to do that because the customer forgot to specify who owns the tooling. I've also gone into factories where the tooling was clearly owned by the customer, but the factory went out of business, the laborers haven't been paid, and they're trying to liquidate the equipment, including tooling. So I've gone in with the boss that's disappeared. I'm the foreign representative, and I'm trying to convince an angry mob why they should let me take the tooling out of the factory. It didn't get out of that factory. It was liquidated out the back door. So if you do have customized tooling, know that there are third parties. For our customers, we open up our warehouse and we let our clients just stick their tooling in my warehouse between production runs, and then we deliver it to the factory to run the parts. So know that if you have proprietary designs, own that tooling. It's a bit technical, but it can save a lot of headaches. All right, here's another real example. I was talking, I think I've told the story so many times at this trade show, I can't remember if it was just an hour ago outside or yesterday, but we were in a situation where we ran into a counterfeit situation where the supplier was taking our patented, U.S. patented product, and basically knocking it off. They had a sister mirror factory next door owned by the cousin, and they would use the same raw materials. So we placed an order for 10,000, they placed an order for 20,000. The materials, half the materials go to the mirror factory, and they're making knockoff products, counterfeits. And against my advice, the customer had the contract. Their New York lawyer, who makes $550 an hour, convinced them that they should put the jurisdiction in USA. Really, so that if there was a court case, that New York lawyer could get paid. It wasn't right for the customer because the factory didn't have any assets in New York. They don't travel to the US very often. So even if you win a court case in the US, how to get it enforced in China, there's no reciprocal court agreements. So we clearly knew that this supplier was knocking us off. That's a federal offense in America because the actual patent number was copied. The branding, everything. The two boxes looked the same. One product was junk, the other was genuine. So we tracked this manager's whereabouts. We hired a private investigator. 1 year, this guy shows up at a trade show in America, and the FBI put him in handcuffs. It was 2 years later, the reputation had been destroyed, the margins were ruined. So if we had just put the jurisdiction in China, we could have gone after him. It was a real factory, real assets. Our lawyers could have sunk their teeth into something. So I always encourage putting the jurisdiction where it can be enforced, where the assets of the supplier are. The beauty of China is, unlike America where court cases take forever and the only real winners are the lawyers, in China the judges are so overwhelmed. If your case is clear-cut and you have a good contract, been involved in 7 court cases in China over my time, have not lost, I've negotiated some, settled, but I've never had a ruling against me. So even as a foreigner, you can get a fair shake in China, but you have to have your contracts in Chinese. They have to be written well. And the jurisdiction should be China. One time, I went in to see the court official to find out when our court case would be done, and the judge was there. And somehow, maybe because I was the only foreigner that's ever been in that court before, the judge wanted to talk to me. And I told him our situation. He picked up the phone, called the supplier, and said, "You're going to lose. You should settle with Mike." So the courts actually brokered the deal for me. I think that's not legal in America, but in China, the judge was so busy, he helped the foreigner out. So as long as your case is well prepared, you might be surprised that the legal system, whether it's IP or in court cases, will work out for you. Define the warranty terms in advance. Often you're so excited, the quality looks great, but more realistic, you should be saying, what possibly could go wrong? What's the worst case scenario? What could go wrong, and how do we put into the agreement, what happens if there are defects? Do I need to send them back to China? Good luck with that. Do I get a replacement? Often, the factories just say, yeah, we'll give you a 10% discount on the next order. That means that they've locked you in to do repeat business. Sometimes defects are sent on purpose in order to get the buyer to buy another order. So you really need to have clear warranty and agreement in place so that you're protected. Sometimes it might be replacement parts, or if you're doing that 30-40-30, maybe you do a count of the rejects and you use that 30% deposit, you keep it or split the difference, something like that. But there can be a plan. Every customer has different requirements, but just make sure there is a plan. Review the written quality manual, the QC plan. This is the product quality manual I talked about before. It's got to be written. They have to have a well-defined way to produce a given product. I volunteer with the Ask the Experts service at the Global Sources website. I also do it at the China Sourcing Information Center. On average, at least 3 times a week, I'm contacted by foreign buyers that say, everything was going great, but then the supplier didn't send us the quality we want, and we want to go to court, but we just noticed that we transferred funds to a Hong Kong company, and our contract is with a mainland China company. Can we go to court? I'm like, no, you made a big mistake. You got to make sure that the name on the contract matches the name on the bank account matches the name on the factory. Because what happens is, so often you're placing a small order, $10,000, and the factory says, well, if you pay us directly in U.S. dollars, we have to go through we have to get the exchange rate, and we have to fill out all sorts of paperwork to convert into RMB. Can't you just pay to my cousin in Hong Kong that has a Hong Kong account and takes U.S. dollars? Now, if it's small, under $5,000, I'll actually do that. I'll say, all right, write a legally binding document with company CHOP that $5,000 sent to your cousin in Hong Kong, you're going to take responsibility if it disappears. Anything over $5,000, I generally don't. But a lot of buyers think, all right, that's just the way they do it in China, so I'm going to transfer $100,000 to the Hong Kong account, which may even be the factory's name, XYZ Company, Hong Kong. Well, that's different from XYZ Zhejiang factory, where you sign the contract and where production is taking place. The factory probably didn't mean to trick you or scam you, but then when there's a problem, they can manipulate the situation. You go to take them to court. The judge says, all right, you have a contract with this factory, and the factory says, we never received payment. Look at our bank accounts. We never received the funds. Oh, but I'm the buyer, and I sent money to this account in Hong Kong. Well, you're going to need to go to Hong Kong and talk to the Hong Kong police to sort that out. 2 countries, 2 systems, 3 headaches. So then you get nowhere, and maybe you can find a way through investigators to link this together, but it's been 3 years before that gets sorted out. Long story short, if you want to protect your money, make sure that the name on the contract matches the name on the bank is the name on the factory gate or the office or the trading company that you visit with. That's probably if you take away anything today, that'll save you some money. Okay, who's the project manager? On the car ride over from China yesterday, I live in Shenzhen and I come over for the trade show each morning, and I'm usually in a van or a bus surrounded by Chinese factories, and everyone's talkative, excited to come to the trade show. And I was talking to some of the salespeople, and I asked the salespeople for the factory, so how much time, or what are you responsible for? I'm responsible for sales and customer service. Well, tell me about what does customer service entail? Customer service is when I update the clients and tell them about how the project's going. Do you have some software for managing that? No. Do you have a spreadsheet for managing that? No. How do you know when to tell the customer? I generally don't unless there's a problem or we need money. So sometimes the factory doesn't want to tell you about these little small problems because they think there's so much competition and you're going to run away and place your order somewhere else. So tell the factory, hey, I'm placing this order, we're partners. If there are problems, you tell me. I want to have a call with you every week at 7 o'clock Chinese time so that we can go over what's going on. And if it's a 5-minute call just to say, how's the weather? Great. But if there are problems, let's deal with it then. So you actually, as the buyer, have to manage the project. A lot of small companies, they didn't realize how much work it is to just manage the vendor. It's not like in the US where you place an order to a catalog, it shows up in 3 months at exactly what you wanted and paid by credit card, and you can go to Amex and say, hey, it's not what I wanted, give me a refund. In China, you actually have to, the placement of the purchase order is the beginning, not the end of your China sourcing experience. So some ways to make that project management system less of a burden and more effective is one, schedule who is doing what and when, set up a time to have a conference call. I call it an OPL, an open project list. At our company, we spend thousands of dollars and have a software system that defines who needs to do what and when, who's responsible, what are the lead times, flags pop up when gates are missed. I've been to factories with 3,000-4,000 employees that don't even have an Excel sheet about who is doing what and when to update the customer. So the price might be great, but it's up to us to make sure that that we're getting updates. So one way to do that is just schedule it. Thanks to Skype, you can make phone calls. Another way is to visit the factory or hire an agent to go there and do it for you. 2 tips. If the sweet spot is when you can order, when your order equals 20 to 35% of the factory's annual output. If you are less than 5%, they're not going to take you seriously. And if you're at like 80 to 90% of the output of a small factory, if you have any instability in your schedule, it's going to trickle down and cause them problems. So the sweet spot is to be, around 30%, 25, 35% of a factory's output. Then they're going to pick up the phone on Tuesday at 7 when it's time to have the talk. They're going to, take your order seriously. So find the right sized order. Be more than a purchase order number. Those customers that come to China, they visit the factory at the trade show one time, then they just see them again next year, or the only time that they talk to the factory when there are problems. You'll become the problem customer that no one wants to deal with. And the salespeople who are supposed to do sales and customer service, they end up just doing sales and then forget about the customer service. So be more than a purchase order. Go to the factory, visit with them. I send, sometimes for my real important suppliers, their pen pals and my children, we invite them to vacation. I always say, hey, come to Niagara Falls. Let me give you a tour of my hometown area. Yeah, sure, you can stay at our cottage on the Finger Lakes for a week. They're always, the suppliers are like, well, thank you. You'd help write a letter of invitation to America? I'll personally deliver it to the embassy. Let's come over and try to come to the U.S. They almost never take me up on it because they're so busy, but the fact that I offered and extended an invitation to come to my country, it says a lot. So be more than just a purchase order number. All right. Okay, I told you that I wouldn't talk too much about my company, but I did not say that I would miss a chance to do a shameless book plug. So here's the book that I wrote based on 15 years in China, and it's all of the checklists and SOPs that I talked about. It also includes it's basically the operation manual of my company, Passage Maker. Unfortunately, our hard copies down at the booth have sold out, but it's available online. You might find it of interest. Okay, if you take away just 3 things today, probably the most important step is to find the right partner up front. If you find the wrong partner because you didn't do your due diligence, you didn't visit the factory, you kind of hope that they're the right partner, it's going to be wrong. In China, if you hope or wish things are going to go well, it doesn't. You need to be sure that they're the right partner. So find the right partner up front, because if it wasn't the right partner, then 6 months later, after you've opened tooling, after you've given a deposit, you find out that you need to switch suppliers, that can be catastrophic. So take a deep breath, change your flights, stay an extra 3 days, go visit the factory, spend the time to go out to that crazy dinner, take a walk around the local park with the factory. Let them see the vision that you have for working together. Make sure it's a great fit for you and them. That's number 1. Number 2 is, if you don't have the time or the financing to do those audits and inspections that we talked about, so linking the payments with inspection of the product, they cost only a couple $100. If your margins are so tight that you can't afford to do the quality control, you really shouldn't be buying from China. You'll be safer if you buy back home from a large distributor, make your margin, and then when you have a budget that you can go to China and do it right, go do it right. So don't you can't go cheap when on quality control. And as I mentioned before, make sure that the name is the same on the bank account, the contract, and the address. I'll say it again, make sure the bank account is the same on the contract and the address. That'll save you a lot. So before we go to question and answer, there's my email. I'm really easy to find. The blog is chinasourcinginfo.org. Also, before we move to question and answer, I'd like to leave you with a couple of resources. Some foreign buyers got together and created supplierblacklist.com, which is every day it grows by dozens of suppliers. If you found a good supplier, don't tell anybody about it. That's your secret. But if you came across a supplier that did you wrong, please tell the rest of the buying community. So this is where I post all of the bad suppliers that I run into. Also, the China Sourcing Service Center is basically a list of the endorsed service providers that I've used over the years. I'm a sourcing agent, but customers come to me and say, Mike, you're doing a great job on the sourcing, but I need some engineering, or I need a lawyer, or can you tell me who can do due diligence or logistics? So rather than every time saying, yeah, let me look up in my Rolodex, I just put the whole Rolodex on the internet and made it public. So sourcingservicecenter.com. If you want to visit more, our team from the Information Center is down at booth 7S05. I'm about to lose my voice, but I'd love to talk. I'd love to answer some questions. So on that note, I'll turn it over to Q&A. Thank you.
Anybody have a question for?
You mentioned about three circles yesterday.
I mentioned about...
Three circles.
Oh, okay, yeah. Neil was talking about the three circles, and the three circles are, where's my notes? Basically, you have building the relationship, understanding what's happening with your supplier. The second is the protocols and documentation, the legal side of it, the paperwork. And the third circle is quality assurance. So some of us spend all of our time building the relationships. Others put all of their time into really tight contracts. Others spend all their money on the quality control. None of those circles by themselves will work. You have to overlap them and make sure that, if you're building the relationship, that you're also making sure that the quality is taken care of. So when you come to a presentation, you'll notice that some speakers specialize in one of those areas. They're really good at quality control, and they talk about how doing inspection will save all of your product, make all the headaches go away. In reality, you need to do a little bit both. You need to have that relationship, you need to have good documentation in terms of contracts, and you need to do quality control. So those are the holy trinity, the three overlapping circles that Professor O'Connor came up with. So that's not mine. I can't steal his thunder. All right, you have another question?
Do you have a list or a place where we can find investigators and quality control people?
Certainly, at the Sourcing Service Center, and also if those of you leave a business card, and I'll send all the links for all the companies. I'll also send this PowerPoint and where you can get the video. So with investigators, there's two types. You have the people that do the audits. At a pre-agreed time, someone like Asia Quality Focus will go to the factory, send a Chinese staff to visit the factory. Factory knows that they're coming. Sometimes they're prepared, sometimes they're not. And you get a snapshot on that day. What does the factory look like? How many employees do they have? Is it clean? Are they producing? You want to buy pens, but it turns out that they're producing leather bands for watches. That's not a good sign. So an audit, a simple factory audit, under $300 US is what I usually pay for a third party to do it, inclusive of all of their travel and the report in English. The other type of investigation is more a hardcore investigation, surveillance, unannounced to the factory. And there are two ways of doing that. One is the financial due diligence, where you would pay a third party. The company I use, Globiz, they're also on this list. And so their Chinese accountants will go to the municipality where your factory is registered and dig up all the paperwork. How many employees do they have? Did they pay taxes on time? All of that's in the public record. The third type of investigation is the real, undercover, two guys in a car sitting outside a factory, following the truck to the port to see who this factory is selling to. That stuff gets expensive. That's like thousands of dollars a day. But when your orders are large, that intelligence has a lot of value. And those companies are a little bit harder to find, but I'd be happy to introduce you to the ones that have done a good job for me.
One more question.
Yes.
The time you spent in China, obviously you've looked at a lot of companies in the verticals of production.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a list of that for?
Yeah, yes and no. For example, if you came to me and you said you needed packaging, well, that's like cardboard boxes. I do that every day. That's pretty easy. If you came to me and said I wanted to buy a tablet or a microphone, your needs would be radically different from the other 300 customers that I have. Everyone has a different need. Some is focused only on quality. They really need quality. My Japanese customers, it's about appearance. Some of the Americans, they want high quality, low price. So everybody has there's no magical list out there that I have, but in a different presentation, as I alluded to before, there are steps that you can take. So you don't need to hire somebody to find that list, but if you follow the process, you can narrow it down to a higher likelihood of finding a real supplier. So yeah, I'm not in the business of selling lists. If you need to hire a company to do that research for you, great. If you want to do it yourself, at the Sourcing Info Center, there is a tutorial on how to spend 40 hours and basically take a list of 100 down to 2 or 3. So it's not easy, because you ask 10 suppliers to quote this microphone. Even if the microphone is the same, the quotation is going to come back different. So as buyers, we have to do a lot of work just to compare apples to apples. Okay, question in the front.
if you're looking at bringing a new product to market, you've invented it, patented it, what, through your experience, would be the steps that are necessary between prototyping and actual, full marketing, production of the product?
Yeah, great question. There's a lot of people at this trade show and probably in this room thinking the same thing. First, if it's worth getting a patent back home, it's worth getting a patent in China. The good news is it'll be less expensive and much quicker in China. China, unlike most of the markets overseas, China is first to register rather than first to market. So imagine you think you're protected because you've got this brand name trademark back home on this great technology. You find a supplier in China, your orders are small, then you get picked up by Walmart, now you're placing $100,000 a month, and that supplier thinks, wow, my customer's really onto something. Let's look into their brand name. Oh, it's not registered? They go to Beijing, spend $200, and now they own your trademark, and you can't manufacture it in China with anybody else but them. So I was on a conference call early on in my career with an American shoe brand, and the conference call was about how we're going to develop the China market for their distribution. I kept looking down at my shoes, like I had the brand on that I bought in China. It turns out that their supplier registered the brand name because they wanted to make some barriers to exit, that if ever the relationship went wrong, they could say, all right, you can get this brand made in China, but it's got to be under another brand name because now we own the brand. So it's so easy, and I'd be happy to introduce you to English-speaking Chinese lawyers. If you've got something worth protecting back home, protect it here, not only so your suppliers can't be tricky or lock you in, but also so that your competition can't come to China and knock you off. China has the image that everything is knocked off and that the Chinese are doing it on purpose. In reality, the real bad guy is your competition that comes to a factory in China and says, hey, you probably haven't heard of this brand, I own the brand, put this brand on the product. The supplier didn't know that that brand was trademarked by somebody else. So often it's the counterfeits are coming in a pull strategy rather than a push strategy out of China. So as a buyer, if it's worth protecting back home, protect it in China. The other suggestion is when a couple of years ago we did 2 hours just on this project, and if you visit the blog, I've got tons of content. When you're at a trade show, a lot of buyers have a great idea for a new product, you're so excited, you come to China and you give 10 suppliers downstairs the details of the product that you have in mind. You figured, hey, it's been patent protected back home. I'm gonna open the kimono, as they say, and show the supplier my technology so that I can get an accurate quote. Because if you don't show it to them, how can you get an accurate quote? I've also seen situations where that same customer comes back to the trade show the next year and sees that their idea is being made by one of the factories that they didn't select. I've also had talks over a couple beers with factory owners where I say, you don't even have an R&D department. How do you come up with new product every year? And he says, April and October, we go to trade shows with our booth. And what he means is buyers come by and say, hey, have you seen this great idea? Can you make it for me? Yeah, we'll give you a quote, and if they don't get the business, they still keep all the blueprints. In order to quote, they have this access. So how do you get around it? Take a product that has maybe similar bill of material, similar technologies. It might be the competition that you're trying to beat. And then you use that representative product to get quotations from the 10 suppliers that you meet at the show. And then they're all quoting on the same product, narrow it down to 2 or 3 suppliers, and then say, all right, let's sign a non-compete, non-disclosure agreement. I want to talk to some references to make sure that you haven't stolen somebody else's technology. And all right, now here's the whole package. Let's work together. So don't unnecessarily show too much information. That's true for a trade show back home. It's not just an Asian thing. You're welcome. Have a question in the back.
Hi, my name is Luis. I have been in China for around 1 year, but I have seen some of my suppliers sometimes change the name of the company.
Yeah.
So I know they are my suppliers, but for other people, they are not the supplier. Another person is the supplier. It seems he's the owner of the company, but it's not the owner. It's a broker.
Oh.
So Is there any website, Chinese website in the government that I can consult in order to find out if this company is the owner of this company is this person or is another person?
Yeah, there is no national website, but it varies from city to city. So some of the developed cities, it's never in English, but it's available and you can go to the registrar. The key is, by law, every business in China, from the dumpling salesman on the street to the Foxconn factory, has a pink sheet. It's about this big, and it hangs up on the wall. It has to be visibly, you can see it easily when you enter the office. That I've gone into factories where I know where it should be, and I look up and I see the dust marks from where they removed it because they didn't want to show who actually owns the factory. Usually that's it's a salesman. Or one time he didn't know I spoke Chinese, so on English it said factory owner and address. In Chinese on the back side it said outside sales representative. The same business card. So when you go into the factory, let's see the business license, and then there's a number that is unique to every company, and that's the number. You go to the municipality, and if you're lucky, they have a website. If they don't have a website, then the due diligence companies that I talked about, for a couple $100, they'll go and go through the paperwork, pull it up, find the latest. And if you're going to confirm who's the owner for the same cost, you can confirm, did they pay their taxes on time? Do they have an import-export license? How many employees do they have? What's their registered capital? China's great. The central government collects a lot of information, and if you know where to look for it, so it can be very helpful.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I?
Yes, please.
Yes, thank you, Mike, for explaining the contracting part, which is actually needs a lot of preparation in advance. So how do you match it to the point to the signing of the contract, and from where do you start, and what does it cost, and in terms of time, money, and effort?
Sure. So, for example, hiring an English-speaking lawyer in China, you can get a PO, bilingual PO template done for a couple $100, and then you can use that over and over again. But a purchase order is different from a contract. So a purchase contract usually is a little bit lengthy, has the warranty terms, what are the penalties for missed delivery, non-disclosure, non-compete. So there are lawyers out there. If you're really on a budget, you can go online and find an English template. There are websites out there like document.com or things that you can find templates, pay some money, but that's not going to be tailor-made to you. So know that for under $1,000, you can get an amazing contract done. However, that contract alone doesn't protect you. I've seen cases where the New York lawyers come in with a 40-page document of English that I can't understand as a native English speaker. They give it to the supplier. It's not in Chinese. The supplier is not going to spend time to translate it, but they know that if they sign on the line, they're going to get an order. So they sign on it. Then later, the supplier says, but you promised you wouldn't sell to Walmart. Oh, I didn't know I signed that, but you're legally obligated, but you didn't explain it to me. So my contracts are generally bilingual, not one Chinese page, one English page, but one sentence English, one sentence Chinese. They're usually never more than 2 or 3 pages long. And when I have the contract signed, I make a big deal about it. I go to the factory. I encourage the factory to bring their key managers. Now everybody's together, and the factory boss signs. A year later, if he knowingly breaks that terms, he's going to lose a lot of face because all of his coworkers saw that Mr. Wong promised he would not sell to Walmart with the contract with Mike. So often it's the loss of face that the suppliers could care less if they're breaking the law in China, but if they lose some face, wow, that's a big deal. So sometimes enforcing the contract, you rely more on the relationship than the law. Yes, court, you can go to court, but if the supplier is clear on the 7 points, and it's up to us as buyers to explain those points. You don't have to do it face by face, but it sure is a lot easier. So that's a long answer to a short question, but having a contract that's tailor-made for you, and if you do it once, then you can use it over and over again through your career with multiple factories.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, we have two more questions. I've got plenty of time. This is the best part of my day.
Having created all the things that you've advised, and you've
you've got your first order, you've received it, you're carrying on, you've gone back looking for some more production of things. What would be your advice to ensure that your continued supply line is being managed here in China?
Sure. Feet in the street. It's whether it's you flying over, appointing a representative, or having some kind of open communication where you're managing things. Whether it's having a outsourced project manager day to day, or just a quality service company that comes in when there are periodic inspections for shipment. But there has to be some type of face-to-face actual. Things can change in China so quick. A factory that's been good for 3 years can have quality fade when a manager leaves or one of their sub-suppliers changes. So you can't use the history to predict the future. That means you have to be diligent about inspection on every order. The same with the payments. So use that chance to negotiate a payment plan. For example, if you or your representative are going to be in China, that's a great time to sit down and say, hey, our original terms were 30/70. We've paid on time for the last year. We've placed orders. We're a repeat business. Let's move to 30/40/30, or let's flip it around and do something better like 10/90. So it's okay to if you're going to be there and communicating with them, try to advance the agenda in your direction. So if you found a good supplier, you still have to manage them to make sure that they remain a good supplier. So build into your budget a trip to China once a year. If you're going to fly over for the trade show to check out new products, add a couple days on the back end to go visit the suppliers that were good. You have to continue to massage the relationship with the good suppliers while you're exploring new suppliers. But I would advise you, if you find a good supplier and you're medium to small, don't try to get 3 or 4 potential suppliers lined up so that you can either play them off against each other or have a backup supplier. Maybe know where those potential suppliers are, but if your orders are small to medium, you don't want to try to get 2 supply chains running. You got to be pretty big before that to make economic sense, because you have to jump through all the hoops with 2 suppliers, and it's twice as many headaches. So for most of my projects, we're building a close relationship with a handful of suppliers, but we have a couple suppliers that have had their product passed inspection or passed the testing. We know that we could get them online, but we don't run two different production lines for the same product.
Thank you, Mike.
Welcome. Did you have another question?
I wanted to know, because I've been in China for about 3 years or so now, and I have some customers, different relationships. Some customers, they give me the supplier that they want to deal with, and I just help them with that relationship. Other customers, it's new relationships. I source product for them, or I help them to brand their own product.
Yeah.
So my question is, what's reasonable in terms of customers that I'm just helping with their own supplier to keep that relationship going and help them to do that, versus if I'm helping them to actually produce the product or brand the product, or I'm providing a lot of added value services.
Sure. So you're asking how should a service provider price their service?
That's right.
That's the secret sauce that I have at my company, but I'm happy to let you see the recipe. Basically, I struggled with that question for many years, and so now we just charge by blocks of time. I don't care if the customer is buying diamonds or Play-Doh. If I have to spend 10 hours of project management, it's based on hours of time. The traditional model is the broker, the agent, the trading company, the consultant, the sourcing advisor charges a percentage of the PO, and we do that as well, but it's based on a block of time. The bad part about the charging only a percentage of the PO is that actually it encourages you to convince the buy side why they should pay more for a product. So there's no incentive to drive the cost down. So what we've done at Passage Maker is we say, all right, we're going to agree to a certain percentage as a performance bonus, where we don't get paid until the product ships out. But in order to cover the ongoing project management, because you might have to, if you're doing engineering and prototyping, you might work with a factory for 8 months before the order ships. And then it turns out that Target changed their mind, and now the customer doesn't have a customer of their own. And if you're working as a as a trading company, if you're working solely on that commission, you can end up getting burnt really bad. So if you've been doing it for 3 years, you've learned that
Sometimes customers, you put in a lot of work and then there's no order.
yeah. So I tried to have it both ways, cover our basic costs through a block of time, but also have a win-win when the order ships. So that's my secret sauce. And any other additional questions? Okay, on that note, I wish you successful sourcing. I'll stick around for any questions that may come up, and also for the rest of the show, I'll be hanging out along with my associates at 7S05. Do leave your business card, and I'll send you the PowerPoints as well. Okay, good luck.